Now is actually a moment I've been really looking forward to since I met Raya in Vancouver. We had an amazing chat about how we see education, where education is going, what we like about it, what we don't like so much about it. And I get very inspired by when people actually take action and do something to change things. And Raya is one of the most powerful change agents that I have met ever. And she's operating in the space of future of education with her business Awecademy. She's going to introduce it to you in just a second. But I picked up the line that it's a future-focused educational organization. That's what it's about. That's disrupting traditional high school curricula and inspiring students to bring about civilization-level change. And that's exactly what we need, Raya. So with that, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. And tell us more about Raya and tell us why you're working in the future of education.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lars, for the beautiful introduction and for the amazing work that you're doing in bringing community leaders and action makers together. Give me a second, I'm going to share my screen here. It doesn't seem to be doing what I need it to be doing. Share. Please let me know if you can see my screen right now.
Yes, we can see your screen, Raya. Yes.
Thank you. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about myself and why I got pushed into the education space, but also tell you a little bit about the Awecademy journey and what we went throughout the ideation and how we ended up where we are. So I'm keeping in mind that I know a lot of people in this portal right now are thinking about launching their own education initiatives. So I'm going to do my best to give you a bit of the inside or background information as opposed to the front level pitch, just to give you some perspective on kind of why we made certain decisions. Well, before getting to Awecademy, a little bit about myself. So I'm Iranian. I grew up in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai for the most part, and I was lucky enough to be a young entrepreneur. So I was actually that token child that the education system really worked well for. I used to get straight A grades. My teachers loved me. I would always raise my hand and answer the questions. I graduated valedictorian, all of that. At some point in about 10th grade, my team and I decided to do something a little different. We were all science enthusiasts and technology enthusiasts, but we found that Dubai didn't have much of that science and technology culture in the general public. So we decided to do something about it and launched SciFest Dubai, which became the first science festival in the city. In the first year, we had up to 10,000 visitors at multiple venues and was featured in BBC World News. So it was an incredible entrepreneurial venture. Our mission was to celebrate science through the arts. And under that umbrella, I worked on Café Scientifique Dubai, which was an initiative to get people to come to a cafe setting and talk about science and technology over a cup of coffee. We've had over 50 events till now. And I also launched Intelligent Optimism, an initiative to get people to be more optimistic and excited about the future in a rational way. And Intelligent Optimism has over 500,000 followers on social media with chapters around the world. I went on to university to study neuroscience, where I continue to work on such projects and work on startups and work on initiatives. What is ironic is throughout this experience, as I started doing more impactful work, my grades started to drop. And throughout the experience of university, I found that at some point I had reached a point where I was no longer reading or watching documentaries or actually making time for things that mattered. I was just studying to take tests and give exams. I found myself at rock bottom at some point when this love of learning had slowly been sucked out of me and this institutionalized system where I only had to learn for grades. Learned because there was a paper that I needed at the end called a diploma. I was learning in a superficial culture where no one's really talking about purpose and meaning and the impact-driven initiatives. And I was finding that it was just a pattern of stressing and cramming, giving the exam, forgetting it, stressing and cramming the next semester, giving the exam, forgetting it, with no purpose whatsoever. And I hated it. And for someone who always loved learning, that was just such a critical part of my identity that was lost. And it was just a very difficult time. And then the most heartbreaking thing for me was seeing how many students were going through similar experiences with very low mental health, with very little happiness, with very little meaning and fulfillment in the formal education system. So I was at a talk once by Luke Nozick, one of the founders of PayPal, and he said something along the lines of finding a problem that really pisses you off and then going about to solve it. And that really clicked for me. It was at that point that I really realized that I was, letting it overwhelm me, and I needed to channel my frustrations towards something productive. It was in many ways a coping mechanism. Now, as Lars mentioned, there's lots of different problems in education, and one organization or initiative cannot solve all of them. But for us, we narrowed down on a set of problems that we felt like we understood the best and we could solve most effectively. So for starters, we know that 65% of the jobs that middle school students today will be doing don't even exist yet. That's because new industries are being born, old ones are dying out, we're going through disruptive innovation. As Lars already pointed out, there is, the workforce is evolving. We're seeing growing demand for 21st century skills like creativity and critical thinking, and less for content knowledge and special expertise. We're seeing the rise of the imagination age and the creative economy, and with automation getting rid of a lot of monotonous routine tasks, we need more multidisciplinary and creative thinkers. We're also seeing a lot of student disengagement. As those images that you showed, Lars really pointed out, how many of our students actually come home from school every day thinking, wow, I'm so inspired, or wow, I'm so energized to learn something, to do something based on what I learned today. I'm so awestruck by this knowledge. Not enough students, in fact, most of them don't come home from school feeling that way. And we wanted to change that. So early on, my team and I, when I first started feeling these frustrations, I started speaking to my co-founder, Rowan, who's Director of Innovation at GEMS Education. He's an award-winning teacher, Global Teachers Prize finalist, and author on this topic. And together we started ideating what today has come to be Awecademy. And I'll give you an overview of what we do and kind of the reasoning behind it as well. So what we are is we're a future-focused educational organization that is disrupting traditional high school curriculum. And we're teaching learners all the skills, mindsets, and values that are not covered in traditional education, but are critical if they're going to have a positive impact on humanity. Our mission is to bring awe and wonder back into the learning experience, but to also use education as a tool for positive civilization level change. Now, how we do this is predominantly through an online platform that gives learners the opportunity to learn interactive modules as per a micro-learning approach, to do by working on projects and competitions, and very soon to be able to connect with other thought leaders. This gives you a kind of sense of the areas we focus on. We don't do courses. We do modules that take less than an hour to complete, anywhere between 20 to 15 minutes. They're interdisciplinary, so we don't do traditional subjects, and they're aimed at developing wisdom and developing fluencies and values as opposed to specific content areas of knowledge. So they can include anything from AI ethics to cultivating creativity to learning more about what makes you happy, coping with death, existential studies, what is the meaning of life, future industries, and so on. So lots of core areas there. And the reason behind that is really clear. We found that high school students will not commit to a 7 to 9 week course. I think the drop-off rates with the MOOCs kind of speak for that. And we tried as much as possible to keep it interactive. So each of these modules on the platform, of which there are 130, includes activities and exercises and self-reflection tasks. So it's not just a passive learning process, it's an active learning process. We didn't want students to just learn things. We didn't want them just to take information and interact with it. So one of the questions you will get asked, and we always get asked, is how are you measuring the impact of the lessons we're learning? And obviously there's lots of qualitative and quantitative ways that you can gather data and measure impact, but we see this as the best way, which is what the students go about to do and create as a byproduct of their learning. So on the platform, we also host a range of projects and challenges that inspire students to be creators and inventors and doers in a variety of ways. And we are hoping that this would be the main way that we measure the impact of what they've learned. Now, throughout all of this, we noticed another problem. So, we started working with the learners and working with schools and education providers to get this out to the learners and young high school students. But throughout that, we found that there weren't enough teachers that had the skills and values and mindsets to develop these curriculums or to actually lead them with their students. And this is when we first started realizing what kind of a wicked problem education is, because you have the problem with the students and you have the educators and you have the industry level. Like there's multiple layers of regressive thinking and multiple layers of traditional mindsets and lack of right skills throughout. So it's one of those wicked issues. So that's where we also launched an educators portal in parallel to the learners portal, where teachers could access cutting-edge, trainings materials on things like STEAM and education, which is in arts and STEM, creating cultures of innovations in schools, the impact of different technologies on the industry, and so on. And these are all CPD certified, so all the educators can get credits for the work that they do with us. And then we noticed the third layer, which was that not enough industry-level experts were up to scale with all of this. Now, the issue with any alternative or supplementary education, whether it's Awecademy or a project you're working on, is that people will only buy in if they realize why it's important, right? If you're selling to an audience that doesn't realize where the future trends are headed, that doesn't realize the limitations of traditional education, then they will not buy into your platform and product. So, we also ended up doing a lot of consulting and a lot of training sessions for management teams around the world, especially in education, because ultimately they're deciding where the budgets go, and ultimately they often end up being a barrier to change. So that's the third kind of parallel offering that we have, but still a lot of focus on the learners material. Naturally, monetization is one of the hardest things in EdTech. What we've done is a freemium subscription model where we've done a lot of volume packages with schools and education providers with obviously one-off payments for workshops. That being said, we do offer free access to any students or schools that can't afford to pay for the platform. So we've been doing that throughout. But we found that really adoption at scale has come best by having that B2B model in education and predominantly working with private international schools in the beginning and then going later on to the district level or the public school sectors. Because you will find that the public sectors are the hardest ones and ones that take the most time to tap into. Just to give you a general early successes that we've had, and I hope that these will also provide as resources that you can tap into in terms of getting some traction with your initiative. So we've been shortlisted and we're currently running as a finalist for multiple awards, including the Next Billion EdTech Prize, Global EdTech Startup Awards, Beta Awards, Reimagine Education Awards, and many out there, which has been amazing in lots of different ways. Earlier this summer, I was invited to the Y20 Summit, which is an initiative of the G20 Summit to speak about the future of work and education. We have also been invited to join Area 2071, which is an incubator space under the UAE Prime Minister's office. So we have the UAE Prime Minister's office support. And in Vancouver, where I am right now, we are part of Spring Accelerator, which is an impact-driven and mission-driven accelerator. Just an overview of the team. I am not a lone wolf. I would not be able to do any of this without an incredible team that we have in place. My co-founder, Rowan, we worked with on the Dubai Science Festival together, and he's also innovation leader at GEMS Education, the largest provider of private schools in the world. Our CTO, Keith, is based out of Boston, and he's a serial entrepreneur and amazing with the technology. And as you can see, we have a remote, decentralized team of global innovators. I want to end on another note. Generally, we talk a lot about preparing young minds for the future. We talk about trying to predict what the future industries will be and what the future skills will be, and then preparing them for that. And yes, that's very valid. But what we also want to do is to prepare learners or young learners to create the future. In the words of Buckminster Fuller, we are called to be the architects of the future and not the victims. The future isn't necessarily set in stone. It's not guaranteed to be amazingly positive, and it's not guaranteed to be a dystopian either. It all comes down to the kind of decisions we as human beings and as leaders make. And what we're aiming to do is equip young minds with the right values, future fluencies, and core competencies that will allow them to create a very exciting future for humanity. So that's all with my presentation. I am going to leave my email in the chat and stay around for the rest of the call. So if you see any ways of collaborating, if there's any way I can help support your initiative, please don't hesitate shooting me an email. I genuinely believe that real change will come from a paradigm shift of many organizations and many companies working towards a common vision. We cannot do it by ourselves. So I am very excited to see what initiatives stem out of the sprints.
So thank you so much, Raya. Very inspiring. And I have one question to you before you close your microphone, and before I introduce our next speaker today. My question is for you to give the best advice you can think of to our fellow community members here before we get started on maybe a journey similar to what you've been through. You've been very successful in going from identifying a problem and actually doing something about it. What do you wish you had known earlier, or what would advice be to community members that are first now coming together in teams and starting to work on a problem?
That's a great question. I want to go with two things. One thing that I think played out really well for us is taking a student-centered approach and taking a scientific approach. So our platform has gone through maybe 5 or 6 iterations at this point. And I think those iterations would have been even less if we had, we did this, but even more of it, of having students test out a version of the solution, give their feedback, or teachers or whoever the stakeholders are, give their feedback, see if it's working, and then design it again. So that whole lean startup approach of, the design thinking approach of making sure you're constantly testing and don't make any assumptions. Because you might think that a certain solution is more impactful, but the market or your user base might actually suggest otherwise. So that's the first one. And the second, I think we would not have grown so quickly if we didn't have such a strong network in education. My team and I had worked with schools, high schools, teachers, principals for at least 10 years before we launched this. And we would not have gotten that adoption. So even if you don't know what your idea is yet, go to the conferences, reach out to people on LinkedIn, go to the events, build your education network, because it is an archaic network in that you cannot just social media market to principals. You can't just get adoption by sending mass email marketing. And you really have to know the people and have the relationships in place with the stakeholders in education if you're going to have any impact. So network away, build as many relationships as you can right now. Yeah.
That's amazing advice. Thank you so much, Raya.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for inspiring us, and Raya will be staying on the call and leaving her contact details. Put questions to Raya if you want in the chat box here in Zoom, and we'll catch up with you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you again, Raya. I just wanted to add one thing to these amazing pieces of advice. That would be, let's inspire each other, right? And this is the point actually of inviting Raya and also our next speaker here. It's to open our mind, is to let us think freely about the education at a big scale and at a high level. And if we get inspired by each other, I'm sure our path to finding the right problem to solve will be a lot easier to find. For some, it's very clear. That path is super clear to many, and to many others it's not clear yet, but we all attracted around the same general theme, which is the future of education. So let's inspire each other, and Raya certainly inspired me a lot here, and I know that she inspired everyone here.